There's a lot that I love about New Jersey. A lot. But I do miss one thing about California, other than my family. It's the mountains. Pretty much wherever you are in the Golden State, the San Fernando Valley, the Silicon Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, there are mountains somewhere nearby. And for me, there's something deeply comforting and peaceful about the mountains. You look up above the haze and the noise of the city and gaze at something beautiful, and all at once, your spirit comes to rest. Maybe that's why I especially love the line that begins Psalm 121. Esa einai el heharim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. The psalmist seems to understand the mysterious power of mountains to bring us help in moments of distress. When the world around us is full of tumult, we lift our eyes to the mountains, symbols of stability and strength, towering presences that were there before we came into the world and will be there long after we're gone. Because the mountains have always been there, permanent features of our landscape, they speak to us of what endures through all of life's changes. But the truth is that mountains, like everything else, are changing all the time. Built up by volcanic eruptions, ground down by glaciers and erosion, they grow and pass away, just as all things grow and pass away. It's just that they change so slowly, on a scale that dwarfs our perception of time. I've been thinking about mountains differently lately, as I've watched my grandparents and my great-aunt move through old age and become increasingly frail. Two of my grandparents died years ago, and I still miss them every day. So I've come to understand that there are mountains on the horizon made of granite and sandstone and shale, and there are people who are like the mountains in our life. They are towering presences, regardless of their height. Permanent features of our personal landscape. They were there before we were born, they've always been there, and their very being gives us a sense of security and comfort. We lean on them, we depend on them as our touchstone and our anchor. When all else is uncertain, we look to them for strength. And when they are gone, our lives are never the same. Today on Yom Kippur, I'm thinking about the mountains in my life, the elders I love and depend on, and how my life is grounded in theirs. And I'm thinking about the mountains in the life of our congregation, elders who have left their mark on Bethel and made it a beautiful community that shines with the light of their spirits. My sermon today is in honor of all of them. Our liturgy on this holy day makes us especially mindful of mortality, of the change and impermanence that are the only constant in our lives. How do we live with the pain of knowing that the people we love will someday pass away? How do we endure the loss of those who are steadfast foundation, the shoulders we stand on, the ones who gave us our lives? For me, there's great comfort in a second verse from Jewish tradition. We sing it in every morning service as part of the Kedusha. L'dor vador nagid godlecha. From generation to generation, we will speak your praise. The first thing to notice is that the familiar phrase, l'dor vador, does not really mean from generation to generation. The Hebrew word dor does mean generation, from the verb to dwell or to endure. But the va in the middle means and. So the phrase actually means something like for generation and generation. And if you think about it, that's quite different. The first phrase, from generation to generation, implies succession. One generation goes and the other comes. Out with the old, in with the new. Elders, please step aside and make room for the young folks. Think instead about the phrase dor vador, generation and generation. This implies that different generations coexist in time. They share the world, always. They touch and overlap. We live amidst our grandparents' and great-grandparents' cohort, even if our own particular relatives have died. The greatest generation dwells alongside all the others, the boomers, the Zoomers, also known as Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, the millennials, and now Gen Alpha, the very youngest folks born between 2013 and 2030. L'dor vador, those words we sing in our prayers, remind us that the generations come together and have something to give one another. Each generation is honored and treasured for what it brings to the world. And more than this, even when they are gone, the generations before us live in us and speak through us. And we live for the sake of those who will carry the torch of our tradition far into the future. We live for the sake of our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, generations we will never see. It's a vision captured in the Parsha that we read on Shabbat morning just a couple weeks ago. Atem nitzavim, you stand this day, all of you, before Adonai your God. I make this covenant not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here and with those who are not with us, with all the generations to come. Moses speaks these words to all of Israel, to all of us linked together, past, present, and future. All of us mysteriously present at the making of the covenant, all of us who are part of this eternal people, Am Olam. And while we are here in every generation, Nagid Godlecha, we will speak your praise. This people, flawed and imperfect though we are as individuals, lives for a sacred purpose, to praise and affirm life, to do God's work, to heal and perfect this sad, shattered world and make it beautiful, make it whole. That's one Jewish teaching that helps us manage the terror and finality of death. We live as part of the continuum of generations, not a meaningless clearing out or casting off, but a sacred chain of life in which great work is handed on from elders to youngsters, with the hope and the prayer that they will take up the work and carry it on. Somebody handed that work on to you. A father who taught you the meaning of quiet courage and integrity, a loving and generous mom, a grandmother whose hugs and kisses and delicious food sustained you, an elder or a teacher who touched your life and made you better. As our hair color and the shape of our eyes and our smile come to us from the distant past, forces of kindness and decency and strength have traveled a long road down the generations to take root in us. Now, while we live, we look for a way to share these gifts with the world. And before we leave this world, we make sure we've passed them on. On this Yom Kippur, I hear the voice of my Savta, Frances Marder, for she was a mountain in my life. I remember standing next to her in synagogue, her arm around me as she sang, joyfully lifting her voice along with the cantor. And I'd give anything to hear her singing again. I remember her love for literature and her fierce commitment to civil rights. I remember the grace with which she accepted change. I cherish the down-to-earth wisdom she shared with me, including a profound lesson she passed on to my dad and then to me, which I've quoted on this bima before. When my dad was a boy and would complain about something he'd seen at school or in the world, saying, "That's not fair," my Savta would always say, "It's true, life is not fair, but people can be fair." I remember how she adored me and called me her little apricot, which is now my nickname for Ami, my one-year-old son and fellow Gingy. And on this Yom Kippur, as always, I remember my Saba, Jack Marder, whose strong shoulders carried our family so well, how he loved his work as a lawyer, how brave he was serving as a medic in World War II, how illness robbed him of his strength, how he found new goals when he could no longer pursue the old ones. I remember his gentleness and his dignity, the quirky cartoons he drew, the stories he told, and the loving touch of his hand. On Yom Kippur, the generations stand together, parents with their children, grandchildren with their grandparents. All the ones we love are present in memory and heart, if not in flesh. We ask God to inscribe us and seal us in the book of life for a new year alongside our loved ones. We pray that the ones we've lost are at peace. All of us are feeling the presence of the ones who came before us, thinking of them, aware of their imperfections, even as we mourn for them and we miss them. Their voices resound in the stillness. Whose voice do you hear today? Whose embrace do you remember? It's here in the synagogue that the phrase dor vador is truly brought to life. In our increasingly segmented, fragmented society, the synagogue is that rare place where the generations coexist. Here we nourish and strengthen one another. But sometimes, as we know, generations find themselves in tension with one another. There are generation gaps, genuine differences, sometimes sharp ones, that can divide us. At such times, I'm especially grateful for individuals who build bridges between the generations, who bring us together to do the great work that unites us. Our Bethel community lost 3 such individuals in this past year. 3 mountains are now gone from our midst. Maybe you knew them. If you come here often, there's a good chance that you did, because they were always here. And maybe, like me, you remember them with love. Sam Convisor, Arnie Nierenberg, and Shirley Gordon, of blessed memory, Zikronam Livracha. These 3 pillars were active members of the Bethel Morning Minyan. I should explain what that means. Many people, when they suffer the loss of a loved one, want to say Kaddish in their memory. And some come to Minyan to say Kaddish for several weeks, others for months, and some for the 11 months traditionally observed in memory of parents. Minyan regulars are the ones who never stop coming. They show up day after day because they want to be here and because they know that others depend on their presence. Sam, Arnie, and Shirley gave themselves to our community in this very special way. They help make the Minyan a friendly, Hamish place where people look out for one another and they take care of each other. Soon after Sam died, his daughter Rena told me that her dad began attending Minyan 24 years ago after Carol, his beloved wife, passed away. Rena said, "The Minyan became a family to him. He helped make the Minyan, and the Minyan kept him." Sam, Arnie, and Shirley were Shabbat regulars, too. It still feels surreal to me to walk into the chapel or sanctuary and not to see them there in their usual spots. I picture Arnie beside his beloved Claire, sporting, as always, a bow tie, always ready with a sweet joke, a story, or insightful question, making sure that the service is running smoothly and that every person feels welcome. Arnie, a past president, possessed a deep faith in God that was only matched by his dedication to our community. He was the first to arrive at Minyan to set up the room. He was present at virtually every Shiva Minyan. And when someone needed him, Arnie was there. In my mind's eye, I see Sam, our dear Shmuel Moshe, in his salmon-colored kippah. The consummate tzedakah collector, he raised more than $11,000 every year, much of which went to causes chosen by our B'nai Mitzvah students. He told stories of old Jewish Newark, working hard to preserve and renew his beloved hometown. Sam made Bethel more beautiful. He planted the trees and flowers just outside, and he loved to tell jokes. And I see Shirley, whose warm and radiant smile embraced everyone around her, with her special gifts for making friends, speaking her mind, and seeing the good in everyone. Shirley brought a positive attitude and determination to everything she did, and she loved most of all her family, including Joy and Jeff. All 3 were people of strong principles who cherished our traditions, yet all 3 were open to the new, curious, and eager to make connections with others. That made them bridge builders, forming bonds across the Bethel generations. Their steadfast kindness and care sustained our community. Their wit and humor lifted our hearts in difficult times. And their Yiddishkeit inspired so many of us. For me, they embodied the precious gifts that one generation can share with another. And here's another example of those gifts. About 5 years ago, a bright and enthusiastic young teenager named Ben Gewurtz walked into my office. he told me that he was in search of a meaningful project that he could do for his bar mitzvah. Ben said that he loved to read, and he wanted to learn how to repair old and damaged Jewish books. And I thought immediately of Joe Adler, a member of our community who's known professionally as the Jewish book maven, a man who buys, sells, and repairs Jewish books. Ben was excited about learning this new skill, and when a 7th grader gets excited about something, you go with it. So I brought the two of them together, a 13-year-old and a 75-year-old, and I got to see the beauty of Lador Vador in action. In his bar mitzvah devar Torah, Ben said this: "I was interested in working on saving old books that have fallen into disrepair. Mr. Adler has taught me how to repair and care for precious Jewish and Yiddish books for future generations to enjoy. By speaking up and saving books, we are saving our cultural and religious heritage." Ben went on to participate in a summer program at the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts. And now, 18 years old, I believe, Ben has used his skills to repair Chumashim for Bethel, and he's even extended the chain of transmission, passing on what Joe taught him to the younger generation. Allison Schwartz, another 13-year-old who loves to read, learned from Ben how to repair old books, and in preparation for her recent bat mitzvah at Bethel, she repaired several copies of our Eitz Chaim Chumashim that were falling apart. Such intergenerational acts of teaching and learning, of kindness and care, bind a community together, and they will sustain us, Lador Vador. I think of a line from Tennyson's great poem about old age, Ulysses. "Though much is taken, much abides." Much is taken from us when we lose the ones we love, the ones who are mountains in our life. Our tears are testimony to the depth of our grief and the depth of our love. But much abides as well, even when they are gone. The lessons they taught, the gifts they shared, the memories that shine with the light of their beautiful souls. At the end of his life, says the Torah, Moses went on a journey. Chapter 31 of the book of Devarim says this: "Vayelech Moshe vayedaber et hadvarim ha'ele el kol Yisrael." Moses went and spoke these words to all of Israel. But our sages are puzzled because the Torah does not say where Moses went. So they suggest several different answers. Ibn Ezra says that Moses went and spoke with each of the 12 tribes, telling them that he was about to die, reassuring them that they would not be left alone, for Joshua would guide them into the promised land. Ramban says that Moshe went to console his people. In those moments, he actually practiced the mitzvah of Nichum Avelim, comforting mourners by anticipating their grief at losing him and saying a loving goodbye. But the most poignant answer for me was offered by the Shem Mishmuel, who lived in Poland in the early 20th century. He says that Moshe's journey was not physical, but spiritual. Vayelech Moshe, Moses went, means that he figuratively walked into the hearts of each and every Israelite through the words that he left them. Think of it. Even as Moses left this world, he entered the hearts of each person who heard his words, each person whose life he touched. So he left us, his distant descendants, a legacy of words, Devarim, words that we still hear today every time we read Torah, words that are embedded in our hearts. Here's a final story about saying goodbye to someone we love. Writer Bob Morris describes his last moments with his father in a memoir called Bobby Wonderful, An Imperfect Son Buries His Parents. They're in the hospital. His dad is on hospice care. Bob and his brother Jeff are at the bedside when a hospital chaplain comes by. "Dad," my brother says, "would you like the rabbi to come in?" My father shakes his head. "No rabbi for me," he says, "it's not necessary." "What would be the harm in a blessing or two?" Jeff asks him. "Please, I really don't need it," he replies. So the rabbi starts to walk away, but Jeff pursues him and brings him back into the hospital room. "It'll only take a minute, Dad," says Jeff. The rabbi opens his book. He is soft-spoken and soothing as he reads from a confessional end-of-life prayer about missing the world and separating from loved ones. When he finishes, the rabbi takes a seat at our father's bedside. "So now I'm going to talk to you for a few more moments, Mr. Morris. and then I'll leave you alone, he says. I'll just tell you a few things that might be of interest. Is that okay? Dad opens his eyes, looks over at the rabbi, and he nods. There's a spot of light inside us, Mr. Morris, when we're born, and it's a little bit of God. It grows as you become a good son, neighbor, husband, parent, and friend, and it grows more each time you do a good deed, each time you listen, each time you help someone. It's a record of your achievements and the love you've shown throughout your life. And being with you now, Mr. Morris, near the end of your life, all I have to do is look at you and your two sons who love you so much, and I can imagine that by now, that spot of God in you is pretty big. Dad nods, almost imperceptibly. One more thought, if I may, Mr. Morris, the rabbi says. Dad nods again. Call me Joe, he whispers. I want you to imagine your whole life now, if you can, Joe, the rabbi says, as my brother and I lean in. And for each time you did something good, imagine it as a little glow, a little spot of illumination that lights a long, dark road, stretching back in time. It's a long, long, long road of lights now, isn't it? My father nods, and so do I. Through my tears, I can see those spots of light, his spots of light, glowing as if in a midst of years as they trail off into the darkness. The desserts he brought to delight my mother, the pride he had in me, the games he played on his hands and knees with nieces and grandchildren, the tennis balls he gave to kids in the park, the postcards he sent to lonely neighbors, the concern he showed fragile relatives, the pro bono law work, the friendliness to strangers, a kind of grace. Yes, the lights are there, glowing pearly white as they trail back into the darkness. He's done the best he can for his whole lifetime. He's done the best he can for his whole lifetime. Like me, like my brother, like all of us, the best we can. My father's last breath came not long after that. We left the hospital and stepped out into the dazzling brightness of a late June afternoon, brothers, but no longer sons. Steady and constant is the thread of care, the trail of light, the flow of loving deeds that define a human life and weave the generations together. I had to say goodbye to my grandparents, but their love continues to nourish me every day of my life. Esa einai el heharim. Let's lift our eyes to the mountains in our lives, to the mountains in our community, for there we find our help. Here's to the ones who went before, who lit the way and loved us well, and here's to the ones who will come after us. May they live long and well. May their fire burn bright, and may their path be illumined by the lights we leave behind to guide them. Gamar Chatima Tova.